Today we're going to talk about research methods in psychology. And basically, when I say technically, I guess that it's in psychology, but it's in any of the social sciences, any of the sciences for that matter. The research methods that we're going to look at real quick. The first one that we'll look at is something you're very familiar with, and that's surveys. You have probably done 8 million surveys in your life, whether they be very scientific or just very casual surveys, run-of-the-mill surveys. But a survey is essentially a questionnaire or an interview. It can come in a written form, that's a questionnaire, or in a verbal form, and that's an interview. These are very important in terms of gauging, people's interest and attitudes and things like that. The Gallup poll industry. The Gallup poll, that is one of the biggest survey organizations in America. And Gallup poll, prior to 1980, they literally would go door to door and ask people their opinions on various things. But as of the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s, they started using telephones because basically everybody had a phone, and so they would randomly select phone numbers from all over, the nation, and then they would call up people and ask them about various things. Nowadays, one of the things that they're going to have to deal with is the idea of cell phones, because now a lot of people are getting rid of their home phone and they're only using a cell phone, and cell phones a lot of times are not listed in like phone books and things like that. So I'm kind of interested to see how they're going to adjust a little bit in terms of the Gallup polls. Second thing that we'll look at is observation. Observation, obviously, one of our goals in psychology is to be able to describe behavior, and to describe it, we have to see it, we have to observe it. And so there are three types, three categories of observation we're going to look at. Naturalistic. Naturalistic is when you observe someone in their own natural setting without their knowledge. So they do not realize that you're actually watching them. Okay? Participant observation is when the observer actually acts as a participant within the group that they're observing. So, this could be a situation where the group may know that the person's observing, or they may not know. It just depends. So, for example, an example of participant observation would be like an undercover police officer that might, take classes at a high school and act, just like any other student. We wouldn't know that they were there, but they were there and they were going through, and their job would be to observe and see what was going on in the student situation at the high school. Now, it also might be out in the open. For example, a foreign exchange student. Foreign exchange students come to America a lot of times to, go to high school and college. My guess is, yes, they're coming over for the education, that's part of it, but they're also coming over to observe and see what is life like in America. What's a typical teenager do in America? They want to experience the whole thing. Now, when they first come over and join us, we know that they're from some other country or what have you. Does it affect the way that we behave around them? It might for a very short time, but eventually we forget all about the fact that, they're here kind of observing, so to speak, and so, we treat them just like any other person. So, participant observation is where the observer participates with the group, and the group may or may not know that they're actually observing. Okay? Now the last one, and this is, I gotta be honest, this is my favorite type of observation. It's called directed or controlled observation. And this is where the observer will set up a situation. They set it up and then they watch to see how people respond to it. You see this a lot of times on TV. Candid camera, the old television show, Candid Camera, was a perfect example of this. They would set up all kinds of scenarios and then see how people responded to them. I mean, it could be anything from super gluing a quarter to the floor in a shopping mall and then watching how people try to get the money, or it could be something much, much more elaborate. If you ask me in class, I will tell you my absolute favorite Candid Camera episode. It was very hilarious, so, to say the least. So, here we're talking about surveys, we're talking about observation. Let's go ahead and take a look at another type of method, and that is the case study. Case study is where you're studying a person, or it could be a problem or issue, or a group. So it could be a person, it could be a group, or it could be some particular issue, and you're going to study it in depth. Now, you might use surveys, you might use observation, you might use existing sources. It could be anything, to gain knowledge about what you're looking at. So, for example, we're trying to figure out what makes Johnny do the things he does. Johnny's behaving very bizarre, and so we may talk to Johnny's parents. We're going to talk to Johnny's family, anybody and everybody in the family. We're going to talk to neighbors. We're going to talk to teachers, friends, enemies, everybody. I mean, we'll talk to the dog if we can get any information out of it to let us know anything more about Johnny. Now, as I said, you can do a case study on a person. You can do a case study on a group of people, or you could do a case study on an issue. So, for example, like autism or ADHD. Our textbook uses those two examples in some of the early chapters. But ADHD or autism, the book kind of goes through and gives you in-depth info about those particular things. Those can be considered case studies as well. The most common form of research in psychology, and it can involve humans and or animals, the most common form is experiments. A lot of times researchers want to see if they can artificially create a situation that allows the researcher to manipulate the variables in the experiment easily. So the experimenter in an experiment is always looking for a causal relationship. Now we're going to talk about what a causal relationship means in class, but basically we're talking about a cause and effect. So an experiment is always trying to find a cause and an effect. Okay? And the experiment needs to be as objective or free from bias as possible. So we cannot always do experiments. You can't take every scenario that an individual's in life and put them in a lab and try and duplicate it. But many things you can. And so they will try to they'll try to get them in a lab setting or, away from just the general public, and they'll try and set up a scenario where they can eliminate all the other factors except the one thing that they're researching. That's one of the things that's very common in an experiment. Now, you may have noticed that I said, yes, we do use animals in experiments. Some people don't like the fact that we use animals in experiments. There are very strict guidelines nowadays. The APA stands for American Psychological Association. The APA has very strict guidelines on the use of subjects in an experiment. The subjects could be human or animal. So you cannot do anything you want to with a human or an animal in an experiment. You can't torture a person or an animal. You can't cause undue stress, that kind of thing. Now, they've tightened up those guidelines over the years because, we're going to talk in class about some examples of experiments that have been done in the past where maybe they were a little bit extreme. So I'll tell you a good example here, and this goes as to why we sometimes use animals? That's a question that comes up a lot. Why use an animal instead of a human? Well, quite simply, there's times when you can do things with animals that you can't do with human beings. For example, let's say that we're trying to find out if intelligence is genetic. Well, if we wanted to study intelligence in animals, maybe we figure out a test that will help us determine, the difference between a smart animal and a dumb animal. And then we can literally do what's called selective breeding. We can breed the smart animals with other smart animals. So let's say we're talking about mice. Okay, so we figure out a way to determine whether a mouse is smart, and then we take the smart rats and we breed them together. And then we study that generation. And then we take the smartest of that generation, breed them together, and we study the next generation. And over the course of many generations, we might be able to see if intelligence tends to be genetic. Now think if we tried to do that with human beings. Can you imagine if we came over the PA one day and we said, hey, we want, the top 10% of seniors to go down to a room, and we're going to put this boy and girl in a room together and another boy and a girl in a room together, and we'd like for you to procreate, and we want to study your offspring. I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, that's not one I don't think you're going to see or hear at school. So there's a case where, for reproduction purposes, you might use animals instead of human beings. You also, in terms of reproduction, animals reproduce a lot quicker. If you're studying generations of human beings, you're talking about a 20-year time period before we reproduce and so on. Animals, literally in a 6 to 9 month time period, rats, you can study several generations of rats in a 6 to 9 month time period, a whole lot quicker. You can also do experiments, things like maybe investigating the brain. We've found, for example, that a lot of animals, rats in particular, behave the same way that humans do in terms of learning, in terms of things like addiction. So maybe you take a few rats and you allow them to become addicted to a particular drug. That kind of stuff can happen. You can do that in an experiment with animals, with rats, but you wouldn't be able to do that with human beings. Okay? So we might talk in class about other examples as well, but let's do a couple other things here. When we talk about research methods, and in particular talking about looking at development of people, there's two types of developmental studies. One's called a longitudinal study. Now, in the word longitudinal, you see the word long. Longitudinal study is a long study, long-term study. We're talking, in all likelihood, it's going to be many, many years of study of the same group of people. Okay? So let's say that you take a group of identical twins and you study those identical twins from birth all the way up till, let's say they're 25, 30 years old. You may have a 30-year-old experiment. Now, most of those types of experiments are done in universities where you have different faculty members working on them, not just one person. You have students helping out. It tends to be very long, obviously, very costly. You got to keep track of your subjects. You usually have to offer them an incentive to come back in. Sometimes you lose subjects along the way, so there's issues there. The other type is a cross-sectional study. And this is when you would study a variety of people of different age groups, but you study them all at the same time. So we may choose a whole bunch of people and say, hey, come to the high school on this weekend, and we put 5-year-olds in one classroom and 20-year-olds in another and 15-year-olds in another. And then we study all those groups all essentially at the same time. And then we come up with our research and do our analysis. So 2 different types. That one takes a lot less time, a lot less money. You don't have to keep quite as detailed records in the long term. So these are all different methods that are used.